You're not broken, but yes, something inside is screaming, something you try to silence with routine, distraction, productivity, something you lock away and call normal. But what if what you call a symptom is actually a calling? What if that emptiness is actually a doorway? Carl Jung knew everything you repress doesn't disappear. It waits, acts in silence, sabotages in silence, and when you least expect it, takes over. This video isn't about fixing you, it's about reminding you. Reminding you of what you forgot, reminding you of what still lives inside, even buried. You don't need to be saved, you need to be heard. And what's about to speak now is your soul. You have no idea what's living inside you, and that's the problem. There's a silent force within you that acts even when you think you're in control. It chooses who you love. It makes you chase things you don't even know why you want. It decides why you explode or why you go quiet. Carl Jung spent his life warning us about this invader, the forgotten part, the unconscious, the unintegrated, but active, very active. And you call it just how I am. You call it being an adult, but it's not. It's just the shadow in charge while you're busy paying bills. That emotional breakdown no one saw, that urge to disappear even when you have everything, that cursed pattern of falling into the same traps again and again. None of that is coincidence. It's this invader sending a message. I'm here, and I'll scream until you look at me. But you've learned to ignore it, to spiritualize it, to work harder, to call it lack of gratitude. And that's when chaos begins. Because the unconscious won't stay silent for long. It implodes, it drags everything down, it tears apart the lies you've been living and calls it healing. But the truth is, most people don't want to heal. They want to adapt, to keep up appearances while crumbling inside. But eventually, that forgotten soul starts banging against the ceiling of your artificial life. And when that happens, you've got two options. You either listen or repeat. And repeating hurts more. Repeating ages you. Repeating kills you while you're still alive. And when you're about to break, you might realize that this force within you doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to bring you back. But for that, you'll have to face what modern psychology pretended didn't exist: the soul. The soul doesn't show up in blood tests. You can't scan it in an MRI. And that's exactly why modern psychology forgot it. They tried to reduce the human being to the mind, to chemistry, to behavior. But that emptiness you feel isn't a disorder. It's a lack of meaning. Carl Jung never separated the psyche from the soul. And that's why he was pushed aside in academia, because the soul can't be tamed. It doesn't obey the DSM. It can't be labeled. And when it's ignored for too long, it screams. And that scream is what many today call a crisis. You're not in crisis, you're being called. But no one told you that. They said it was burnout, anxiety, depression. And yes, those labels can be helpful. But when they're used to silence pain instead of listen to it, they become shackles. So what do? You medicate to endure. You stay busy to forget. You spiritualize to look okay. But the chaos remains inside, because the forgotten soul doesn't disappear, it sickens. And this illness is subtle. A growing apathy, a constant urge to give up, an existential boredom no novelty can cure. And the cruelest part? You start thinking there's something wrong with you. But there isn't. The error isn't feeling too much. The error is living in a society that amputated the sacred and called that maturity. You don't need more productivity. You need reconnection. And that reconnection takes courage. Because when the soul begins to awaken, it drags you into a sea. A sea that lives inside you, but you've been trained to ignore it since childhood. There's an ocean inside you, a deep, chaotic, living ocean, but no one ever taught you how to swim in it. They told you feeling too much was weakness, that doubting was a sin, that diving inward was dangerous, so you learned to build boats of distraction, career, performance, routine. But the ocean never left. It kept calling. Carl Jung said the unconscious is like a bottomless ocean, and you're just a boat trying to stay steady on waters that demand storms. This ocean carries everything you've repressed: pain, instinct, fear, desire, shadow. And no matter how much you try to sail only on the surface, at some point the water rises. It floods the cabin, soaks your clothes, weighs your body down, and you realize you're no longer in control. The wave of the soul begins to drown you precisely when you tried the hardest to stay in control. But listen, maybe you need to drown a little to remember you know how to breathe underwater. The ocean doesn't want to kill you, it wants to return you. Return your depth, your truth, your wholeness, because only when you descend to the bottom do you find the reflection you've always avoided, the shadow, and in that shadow, the next portal opens. The shadow isn't your opposite, it's your whole self, without filters. It carries everything you've learned to hide, the anger you smother with smiles, the pride you cover with spirituality, the envy you disguise as opinion. It's your untamed self, the one who feels too much, wants too much, fears too much, and you spend your life trying to bury it until it overflows. Carl Jung didn't see the shadow as something to eliminate. He said the real danger is in not integrating it. And when you reject it, it acts from behind the scenes. That's why you self-sabotage when everything's going well, why you repeat relationships that hurt you, why you feel guilty when you finally allow yourself to be happy. The shadow is on autopilot, steering your life while you believe you're in control. But here's the final blow. The shadow just wants to be seen. It doesn't need judgment. It needs space. It needs to be heard, like a forgotten child crying in a dark room. And when you finally enter that room, you don't find the monster you imagined. You find the part of your soul that was left behind so you could be accepted. And in that encounter, something else rises louder. The self. And it cries out when the mask cracks, when the persona collapses, and you can no longer keep pretending to be someone you never were. The persona is a socially acceptable lie. It's who you learn to be in order to survive. It's the strong one who never cries, the spiritual one who always understands, the mature one who doesn't feel anger, the professional who holds it all in. You've worn this mask since childhood, and yes, it saved you. It helped you fit in, avoid rejection, belong. But the problem begins when the mask won't come off anymore. You get used to it. You confuse the armor for your skin, and one day you wake up not knowing who you are. Without the character, that's the beginning of the collapse. The exact moment when the soul starts banging against the walls of your identity, and everything that seemed solid starts to crack. Carl Jung said the persona is a necessary psychic function, but it becomes pathological when you identify with it. In other words, the problem isn't wearing a mask. It's forgetting it's just a mask. When you start confusing yourself with the role you play, the therapist, the strong one, the well-adjusted, you disconnect from the soul. And the soul, when ignored, begins to implode the structure. You feel it as emotional exhaustion, chronic emptiness, a sudden urge to walk away from everything. Nothing satisfies anymore. Not money, not affection, not recognition. The flavor of life vanishes. And deep down, some part of you knows you've been living through a character. And the self, locked backstage for years, starts to scream. But it doesn't scream in words. It screams through collapse. And here comes the rupture. The collapse of the persona isn't the end. It's the calling. It's when the self says, enough. Enough pretending. Enough pleasing. Enough surviving with a smile. The crisis that brought you to rock bottom might actually be your only chance to return, because the self can only emerge when the ego finally lets go of the role, and it won't hand you a new mask. It will hand you the abyss, because it's in the abyss that individuation begins. The crossing where everything that's not truly you dies, and what remains, raw, naked, alive, is you. That's what hurts, but that's what frees you. The journey of individuation begins when the soul can no longer stay silent, when the character breaks, when chaos settles in without any logical explanation and everything that once made sense loses its flavor. Individuation is a brutal process of dismantling. It's not a pretty path. It's not romantic. It's symbolic, messy, internal. The kind of death no one celebrates because you can't post about it. The kind of rebirth that happens in silence, while the world thinks you're just tired. Carl Jung called this the reconnection with the self, the psychic force that rips you away from what's false and takes you back to what's real. And real at this stage has no manual, no name, no structure, only presence. And that presence comes only after everything collapses. After the soul, tired of being ignored, decides to break free from everything that numbed it. You don't choose individuation, it chooses you. And when it does, it demands sacrifice. Not offerings, but versions, narratives, attachments you once believed were who you truly were. Dying to be reborn is not a poetic metaphor, it's raw spiritual practice. You'll have to let go of people who fed your character, leave places that still call you by your old name. Walk with no applause, no certainty, no emotional GPS. And during this in-between, while the old dissolves and the new hasn't arrived, chaos may feel like identity. But it's not. Chaos is the midwife. It tears to make way, it destroys to create space. It makes a mess so you can finally see. And when the pain becomes too much and you're about to give up, breathe. Because that's exactly when the self begins to rise. This new self doesn't scream. It whispers, and you'll only hear it if you're willing to stay in silence, radical silence, the kind that forces you to face what you've always delayed. At that point, your dreams start to intensify, and these aren't ordinary dreams. They're symbolic messages from the unconscious, full of archetypal images that speak a language the rational mind can't understand. The soul starts using metaphors to teach you. And each symbol that appears, the abandoned house, the broken mirror, the raging sea, is a map of what you still need to integrate. The collapse wasn't the end. It was the beginning of your rebirth. And now, as you try to breathe in this new skin, the unconscious finds a new way to guide your journey, the dream. When the waking world can no longer hold the soul, the unconscious starts to speak through dreams. And it doesn't speak with logic. It speaks in symbols. It speaks with images that frighten, enchant, and stir something deep. Carl Jung understood this like no one else. Dreams are living expressions of the psyche, messages from the self trying to break through the veil of consciousness. And when the soul is forgotten, it cries for rescue in that nocturnal realm. You don't dream by accident. Waking up crying, confused, unsettled, isn't random. It's code. And every figure that shows up, a house, an animal, an object, a road, has something to reveal. Not about your future, but about the present state of the soul you abandoned. Dreams aren't trying to confuse you. They're trying to remind you of what was silenced, of what was repressed, of the part of you that still hasn't been heard. A recurring dream might be a trauma knocking on your door. A nightmare could be the shadow asking to be integrated. A falling dream might be showing you the collapse of the persona. And when you start listening with presence, you realize you've been guided the whole time. Not with arrows, but with mirrors. Every dream image is a fragment of the soul trying to return to the body. And if you're willing to dive in, to translate, to feel, the dream becomes a portal. It shows you where it hurts, but also where it pulses. Here's the secret no one told you. Dream interpretation isn't about finding ready-made answers. It's about learning to feel the symbol. A stormy ocean might represent the unconscious you're afraid of. A shattered mirror might point to your fragmented identity. An old stranger might be the wise archetype, showing you a path you've refused to see. Don't dismiss strange dreams. Don't underestimate the details that keep coming back. The unconscious is patient, but not harmless. If you don't listen, it will intensify until the soul speaks louder than logic. And when that happens, the archetypes take the stage and begin to direct your life. You're not just living your own story, you're also living stories that began long before you were born. Ancestral stories, collective ones, universal ones. Carl Jung called these forces archetypes, primordial psychic structures that shape how you see the world, how you love, suffer, react, choose. They're like invisible directors of an inner theater that plays on even when you think you're improvising. The archetype of the mother, the father, the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the inner child, they all live inside you. And what feels like a personal choice is often unconscious reenactment. You think it's you, but it's the script speaking. These archetypes aren't characters outside you. They live in your language, in your dreams, in your relationships. When you feel too small in the face of life, the victim archetype might be in charge. When you demand perfection from yourself at all times, it could be the wounded orphan trying to prove its worth. When you enter destructive relationships, you might be replaying the archetypal pain of abandonment or the ancestral cycle of betrayal. And if you never recognize these patterns, you live under their rule without even knowing it. The problem isn't having archetypes. The problem is being possessed by them, and that happens when you live on autopilot, unaware of your deep psyche. Individuation, according to Jung, is the process of becoming aware of these forces and integrating them. Not to erase them, but to stop them from staying invisible. When you name what lives inside you, you gain the power to choose, to break cycles, to step off the script. And that's the beginning of inner sovereignty. Because up until now, your unconscious was directing your life, and you called it destiny. Recognizing archetypes isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's a spiritual practice. It's realizing that what you keep repeating isn't a moral flaw. It's a call to rescue the parts of you still living in the dark. And when light finally enters, the chaos starts to reorganize. But not the outer chaos, the inner one. We live in a time where everything seems accessible, except meaning. Technology evolved, bodies were optimized, routines were fine-tuned, goals were met, but inside the soul remains empty. Modern chaos isn't just social, it's spiritual. It's the collective collapse of a humanity that traded silence for performance, listening for speed, the inner world for the algorithm. Carl Jung warned, when the connection to the self is broken, the outer world becomes a prison. And that's exactly what we're living. An epidemic of lives full of movement, but void of meaning. People who wake up, produce, post, run, and return home exhausted with a void nothing can fill. That void has a name. It's the place where your soul used to live, but it was exiled in the name of productivity. This crisis has no shape. It shows up as unexplained fatigue, as boredom toward what once excited you, as a quiet anguish you can't explain. You look around and everything seems to be working, except you. You feel like something's wrong with the world, but still blame yourself for not being happy. And in that psychic confusion, you begin to suffer in silence. Society offers you distraction. It gives you series, rewards, promises. But what your soul longs for, none of these things can offer. It wants purpose, and purpose can't be bought, can't be rushed, can't be earned through effort. It reveals itself when you return to the center of what moves you. And that return only happens when you admit living in chaos isn't living, it's surviving. And here comes the hardest part, admitting that the chaos is yours, that no matter how loud the world gets, the real war is inside, that you might have done everything right, and still feel profoundly wrong. That discomfort marks the end of the character and the beginning of the crossing. Carl Jung knew the soul only finds meaning when it stops running, and meaning in this context isn't a goal. It's a state of presence, of inner belonging, of finally fitting inside yourself again. And when you begin to return, you realize the center was never outside. It was always waiting. And now, maybe for the first time, you're ready to come back. Returning to your center doesn't mean going back to who you were. It means going back to who you've always been, but got covered up. The center has no noise, no urgency, no applause. It has silence, presence, a quiet strength that has nothing to prove to anyone. And that's exactly why most people avoid it, because the center demands renunciation of speed, of persona, of excess. Carl Jung said the self, when integrated, becomes the soul's compass. And this compass doesn't point outward, it points inward, and inside isn't always pretty, but it's true. And only there do you begin to feel at home. Not in places, but in yourself. Not in people, but in silence. This choice, the choice to return to center, doesn't happen all at once. It's made little by little in every decision that breaks the autopilot. It's the no you say to please others less and hear yourself more. It's the yes you give to whatever pulls you closer to what makes you come alive. It's when you stop asking what others expect of you and start asking what your soul wants. That simple question changes everything. It returns the sacred weight of responsibility. Because now you know you can't outsource your destiny anymore. You can't lie to yourself and call it maturity. Returning to center is choosing the pain of clarity, but also harvesting the peace of finally stopping the escape. The peace that depends on nothing, the peace that's born only when the soul begins to breathe again. And here, in this place with no map, no manual, no guarantee, you begin to live for the very first time. Not the way others dreamed for you, but the way you feel. You realize that the recurring dream wasn't just a warning, it was the path. You understand the collapse wasn't punishment, it was liberation. That the shadow wasn't the enemy, it was memory. And that chaos, as terrifying as it was the invitation to choose again, to choose with awareness, with presence, with love for everything that no longer needs to be. And then you choose. And that choice, silent but alive, sets you free. And now that you've heard all this, what will you do with what you felt? Will you silence it again? Pretend you didn't understand? Go back to autopilot, as if nothing touched you? Or will you stop? Stop running. Stop losing yourself trying to look whole. Stop calling survival life. You're not broken, you're fragmented. And each fragment holds a piece of what you came here to recover. The unconscious has already shown it. The shadow has already spoken. The chaos has already shaken you. Now it's you with yourself. No audience, no excuses. If something woke up in you, write it down. Sometimes a single comment is the first whisper back to your soul. And if you want to keep returning, subscribe to the channel. Here, the journey doesn't end. It only begins from the inside out.